kind of, again, use what we learn in those four passages to kind of see if we can't illustrate his spiritual journey and the things he learned and maybe the impact he had on spreading of the gospel, and maybe the impact that he had on helping Jesus meet other people and spread his message. Okay, so kind of first little fact about Philip. He has a Jewish name. He had Jewish parents. Excuse me, let me say this right. He had Jewish parents and a Greek name. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay, so a possible inference there would be that his parents, although Jewish, probably had some capacity of understanding of culture outside of their Jewish culture at the time of, I guess you could say, Gentile culture, if you will, And so you would think of his parents as possibly maybe progressive Jews or cultured Jews, okay? And then the second thing to know is that his parents probably liked horses because his name means lover of horses, okay? Philos meaning love and hippos meaning horses, right? And another little fun fact I learned in my study is that a hippopotamus means horse of the river. Hippo meaning horse, and then the Greek word that starts with a P that I can't pronounce, meaning river. And of course, like Mesopotamia means, meso means intermediate, between, and then the P word means river, between two rivers, right? So we learned that hippopotamus means horse of the river. I thought that was kind of funny. So, but again, I would say his parents probably loved horses maybe more than him, even though we don't really know, right? So, he was from Bethsaida, okay? We've heard that city a lot. It's a fairly significant city. Andrew, Peter, James, and John were also from that city. Small town by the Lake of Galilee. So that's basically what we know about him that's not expressly told in the book of John, okay? So let's start with looking at the four appearances in the book of John that we're going to study, okay? Let's first start with John 1, okay? I'm going to get there myself. And let's go 43 through 49, okay? John 1, 43 through 49. The next day, Jesus decided to leave for Galilee. Finding Philip, he said to him, "Follow me." Philip, like Andrew and Peter, was from the town of Bethsaida. Philip found Nathanael and told him, "We have found the one Moses wrote about in the law, and about whom the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." And then Nathanael asked, "Nazareth, can anything good come from there?" Philip simply said, "Come and see," right? When Jesus saw, well, actually, I want to stop there. So the last thing in that verse we see at the end of 46 is Philip told Nathanael, "Come and see," right? A very, very simple response to a pretty cynical question on the part of Nathanael, right? So what we see here is Jesus meets Philip and simply says, "Follow me," and he does. So I think the first thing that you kind of wonder there is, did Philip know who Jesus was? Had he heard of Jesus at that point? And I think it certainly seems so. He talked about how, Jesus, the son of Joseph, that we had heard about. So, it certainly seems that he knows who Jesus is. And he's also from a small town with other followers, because remember, we talked about with Bethsaida, Andrew, Peter, James, and John are from there, right? So Jesus was probably fairly well known in that area. So I think he definitely knew who Jesus was, okay? He even said they found the person Moses talked about, which also kind of signifies what I'm going to call his possibly Jewish religious upbringing, right? So he had an understanding of who he was dealing with and the profound nature of the person that he was talking to who was asking him to come follow him, okay? He seemed to have about as clear a belief as anyone in that situation. He even believes that Jesus is the fulfillment of the prophecies. So I think we can glean a fairly deep understanding on the part of Philip. So then there's another question that I think we have to ask here. Reading that text again. Do you think he knew he was called? When Jesus said, "Follow me," do we think he knew that he was called? I don't think we can say for sure, but he was excited. I do know that. When Jesus said, "Follow me," he was excited. He told Nathanael about it. And I sense, when I read that text, I don't know if y'all do, but when I read that text, I sense excitement on the part of Philip, okay? I mean, he's sitting there saying, we have found the one Moses wrote about in the law and about whom the prophets also wrote. And he was very happy to jump on board, let's call it. So, and of course, when we see Nathanael's response, it was quite a bit different. He said, "Who cares about Nazareth?" Because, if you think about it at the time, Jerusalem was kind of the center of the religious world. They would probably have expected Jesus, not probably, I don't know, possibly expected Jesus to come from Jerusalem. So when Nathanael answers that, he answers it with a little bit of prejudice. But of course, as usual, kind of an underlying message to glean from this is God surprises, as he always does. The most straightforward, predictable thing would have been possibly for Christ to come from Jerusalem. But instead, he comes from Nazareth. And that I think that does create more of the narrative that he was going for at that time. So then the last thing I want to mention here is that Philip's response was not to argue. His response was not to prop Jesus up more, become dramatic about it, become frustrated. None of that. He just simply said, "Come see," right? Remove the prejudice. Come see. That's all you got to do. And that was certainly I think, possibly an emotionally mature way to handle that type of interaction. So I think that was a positive thing. He had experienced Jesus, and he wanted Nathanael to experience Jesus. He was missioning. He was witnessing, right? Don't prejudge. Just come take a look. And if you look with open eyes, your prejudices will probably fall off, right? So through that first passage that we've looked at, we've seen Philip's calling, okay? And if you've studied further about him, if you know much about him, you know that kind of the last interaction we know about is a very significant interaction where Philip asks, "Show us the Father," right? So we're going to kind of begin to connect what we started with, his calling, right, and how he handled that first act of faith, all the way to a really profound question that he's willing to ask Jesus later, "Show us the Father," right? So his second appearance is in John 6. Okay, if everybody wants to turn with me to John 6.
Before you leave that?
Yeah.
I think this is fascinating, how with Philip and Nathanael here,
Mm-hmm.
Philip called him Nathanael and said, "I found him, the Savior."
Mm-hmm.
And Philip told him to come with me. People don't just drop and just come to you out of happenstance.
Yeah.
The Messiah was prophesied for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And it was evident, as you said, that they knew the law.
Mm-hmm.
But what really gets me is verse 50.
Okay. I'm going to look at it too.
When Philip told Nathanael, come and see, go and ask him and see who he is.
Mm-hmm.
Nathanael went. And Jesus said, "I saw thee." will see people who are seeking him.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it was just fascinating to me just reading this that it must have blew Nathaniel's mind when he said, "Well, are you the Son of God?" He's basically saying, "You are the Son of God."
Yeah. Yeah.
And Jesus told him, he said, "How did you know me? How did you see me?" Well, Jesus said, "Before Philip even called you, I saw you."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He sees us too.
That's right. Yeah, that's a great point. That is a very, very good point.
He sees us who are seeking him.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that's a very important thing to put a pin in. Jesus sees us.
Yeah.
He knows our heart. He knows who is sincere and who's faking it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely right. That is absolutely right. And one of I think, kind of bringing it to the Apostle Philip, the point that's being made is that Jesus sees us. He wants us to seek him, and he sees us. And in the context, that's a great point. And in the context of Philip, the apostle, the illustration we can draw from that is the Lord needs others to facilitate seeking and finding, right? And that's kind of Philip's first known act of witnessing and being a missionary for Christ. And you think about Jewish writing was not always terribly detail-oriented. From what I understand, and I am by no means an expert on this, somebody who is can correct me if I'm wrong, but by and large, the reason we see at times slight details that appear differently throughout the New Testament, particularly the Gospels, where we're reading different accounts of the same things that have happened, you'll see these slight details that are off, and it makes you question, why is it that way? And from what I understand, Jewish writing was not, they didn't care about that a whole lot. They cared about making the point, and they didn't need to make the same point over and over like sometimes I like to do and like we like to do, paint the same picture in different ways. They just said it. Sometimes it wasn't details. We're trying to get the big picture across, and that's what it was. And it makes me wonder, I think sometimes about how quickly we're told the early church spread throughout that region, how quickly it grew. And it makes me wonder how many more subtle interactions like this took place. How many more times, did Christ use people's willingness to follow him? And how many more times did these individuals that we study about do the exact same thing, right? Because in a short period of time, we do know the church grew significantly. So I think that's a pretty nice illustration of his first act, right? So,
Hey, Kyle,
yes, sir.
I'm just thinking that I had not thought about this, the fig tree, but Jesus had an affinity with trees because he sees him under the fig tree. He saw Zacchaeus up in a tree. When he comes to Jerusalem, branches from trees are laid down in front of them, and then he's hung on a tree.
Yeah. Wow. That is yeah. 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 Wow. That is an interesting, it's kind of a profound point. That's one of the things about, I personally enjoy about, teaching and talking about things like this, because you think about things that you hadn't even, yeah. I mean, and it opens a whole new door of things to explore. And I also enjoy talking and teaching with people who are a little bit my elder and a little bit more wise, because it helps me think about things I hadn't thought of. So I certainly appreciate that point. So thinking about the second interaction, kind of moving forward to the second interaction. No, this is awesome. This is perfect. I don't have to talk the whole time. I like it. Appreciate y'all. So in the second interaction, we all know about when Jesus fed the 5,000. Okay, so this is going to be John 6, 5 through 10. Okay. Make sure I don't read past where I need to this time. All right, when Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming towards him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" Okay, so Jesus is almost already, the lesson has begun, right? Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat? He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, "It would take more than a half year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite." Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many?" Right? So what you have here is Philip obviously has no faith, right? Doubt it, right? He's already answered the call. He is already missioning on behalf of Jesus. And I think it would be real easy to read that and say, well, he just doesn't really believe that Jesus can do what he says he's going to do, and Andrew does, right? Andrew's more action-oriented, and Andrew does believe. I think that would probably be selling Philip a little bit short to make that conclusion, because he had already shown great faith, right? I don't think he's lacking faith. It may just be that he's a warm-hearted realist. You know, he may just look at that and be like, I have no idea how we're going to do this. He may not have seen the full capabilities of what Jesus could and would eventually do. So, I mean, we know that Jesus did end up feeding 5,000 people, and there was an earthly problem with a supernatural solution, okay? But I think another thing that we can take from this would be, what did Philip learn by that? Right? What did he learn by that? He learned that Jesus feeds our minds and our spirit, but Jesus also feeds our bodies. And you talk about themes, Don. There's a theme throughout Jesus' ministry of Jesus feeding both our earthly needs and our spiritual needs, right? So, and another interesting lesson that I think can be taken from this is he involves his apostles, right? He asks questions. He has them think a little bit. He sort of messes with them, is what I would say. Kind of keeps them thinking, right? Keeps them on their toes so that they'll be aware and so that they'll learn. And I think Jesus works this way in our lives too, in the church. Something else I noticed was there's a little bit of teamwork here, right? There was, Philip having a question, and then Andrew having a response, right? And so there was a little bit of collaboration there, and I think that's something. And I mean, again, we're drawing lessons. The Bible doesn't explicitly say that. We don't know for sure that Jesus' entire intent there was to get them to think through it together and work through it together, and then see Jesus' solution and it all click. I don't know that for sure. But I think it's certainly possible. I mean, I think the bigger lesson was Jesus fills our spirits and our body. He feeds our spirits and our body. You know, I think that's... Oh, Jake, yes, sir.
But don't miss the point in verse 6 that he says he did this to test him.
To test him. Okay, so you're... To test his faith. Okay, well,
That's the
good
same
point.
thing that happens to us today.
Yeah.
We must trust Jesus and God, but we are being tested when we don't.
So a lesson of trust, not just seeing, but trusting. Jake makes the point in verse 6 that he said to test Philip. And I didn't really think of it, I mean, it says it right there, and I guess it just went right past me. I didn't necessarily think of it as a full-on test of faith, because I think he had already shown his faith. But to your point, Jake, it literally says that. So I think we'll go with that. I think we can say it probably was a... Say that again?
You've heard that before.
Yeah, touche. All right. So the ultimate lesson, kind of going back to what Austin said this morning, is anything trusted to and left to the hands of Jesus is good. He is where you want to be. It's a good place to be. It's a safe place to be, because he will keep you fed, right? I mean, I think that's when we talk about Philip's spiritual maturity leading up to something pretty powerful that we're going to see here in a sec. Hopefully, he learned that type of lesson that we all need to learn, and he is used as an illustration that helps us as well as Christians, okay? So let's go to his third appearance, which is... Yes, sir.
It's interesting that he selected Philip out of the group, and I know Philip was that was one of his responsibilities in the discipleship there. But
Make sure I'm clear. What was specifically one of his responsibilities you're thinking?
that maybe he was responsible for acquiring the food for the group.
Oh, yeah, gotcha.
And, a smaller group when they're traveling. Nothing proves that. There's nothing scriptural about that. But it's interesting that he selects Philip out of all those apostles and asks him, where are we going to get this? Where are we going to do this? So going back to Jacob.
Because he had some context of how we would normally handle this situation, and I'm totally overwhelmed.
Yeah, that's the understanding, but it may also be that his faith had been waning in the group, and Jesus was bringing him into the test that Jake just mentioned, because he had just healed lame, raised dead. I mean,
Philip had seen.
Philip had seen these things.
Gotcha. Yeah.
But then when they get to this point, just to feed people, he looks directly at Philip. And I think that's important to think about. Jesus has he focuses on each one of us. When our faith wanes, he knows it. And he cares about each one of us individually, not just as a collective group, but individually. And he will do things like that to test us.
Yeah, because he knows more. He knows what we need better than we do. Yes, sir.
Sorry, also, I think along those same lines, I was thinking about it defied human reasoning here, right?
Sure.
They first looked to see who had fish and who had bread. They find a little boy. They don't have enough money, obviously, to buy what they need. So for us today, I think our faith grows when we have those opportunities in life that defy our human reasoning. I don't mean it's a miraculous thing, but, it's something comes before us and we put our human minds on and we look at it and think, how in the world are we going to do that? That just seems like an impossible obstacle. Well, that's where if we trust in God,
Sure.
God can provide a way. I'll brag on Jake in our elders meetings all the time. Sometimes we'll be discussing about money issues.
Sure.
Or we need something, and Jake always reminds, he says, brothers, God will provide a way.
Yep.
God will provide a way. He always says that. And I know he believes it. And it's just a good reminder. That's where faith has a chance to grow. I think that's what God does today with us. It's been said before about putting obstacles or allowing obstacles to be there. Not necessarily putting them there, but allowing them to be there to see how our faith can grow and respond to
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. Perhaps we're not seeking miraculous intervention, but we are seeking God's plan to work out in our lives, right? Allow God to be what He is, right? And I think those are two really, really good points. And I honestly, I sincerely appreciate all the feedback as we go through class, because this is pretty cool stuff. I think there's a lot to learn. I went into this study thinking, man, there's like four what appear to be meaningful verses. I got about 10 minutes of stuff, and then it ended up being, man, can I teach 2 weeks?
If I could add one more thing.
Please.
About the test. A lot of times we look at a test, pass, fail. I believe this is just an instructional moment rather than a pass, fail in the way we look at things. Paul said in 2 Corinthians 13:5, he says, test yourselves to see if you are in the faith. Examine yourselves, for you do not recognize this is about yourselves, that Jesus Christ is in you. So Jesus Christ was, I believe, instructing, drawn to his point. Christ knows our weaknesses. Each of us have a weakness, and so those weaknesses are what we need to work on. And he was helping Philip at this time.
That's a great point. Yeah, these are some really, really good points. And the overall point here is that perhaps Philip did, for those of you who might not have been able to hear everybody talking, the whole idea is Philip probably had seen Jesus' power, yet in that moment he may not have really trusted it. And Jesus Jesus knew that he needed testing and he needed showing, right? And when I originally read it, I thought, well, he had faith. He had shown He had just dropped everything and followed Jesus. He was excited. He knew who he was. So I didn't think of him as being a person with no faith. And again, while we don't know for sure, I want to make sure that we do not turn pontification into fact necessarily. But when we're examining these things that are left to our own assumptions, let's try to make it useful and let's apply it in the right way. Sure, it's possible that he was a man of faith and just didn't see, but it's also possible and maybe even probable after, kind of what I've heard, it may even be probable that he needed help, that his faith was not where it should be, and that Jesus did see that there was a need to strengthen his faith a little bit, and this is how he did it.
Yeah, in this particular area.
In this particular area.
He mentions numbers. Some of us are about numbers. And so we quote, hey,
Yeah.
we got X number, this is what we got, right?
Yeah.
So we do that. And that was his weakness, it appears, where he may have been very strong in a lot of other areas. Walking by faith in certain areas and other areas is very strong.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Ken was saying that this may have just been one part of his life that he was a little bit weak in, right? He may have been very strong in other ways. So, again, a lot. That's what's so cool about this. We can definitely see an arc of his spiritual journey throughout the few things that we know about him. So, really good discussion. Okay, so there's a point here, and I think we got about 10 minutes. I want to make sure we get to it. So I'm going to go through the third part really quickly, okay? It's John 12, 20 through 22, okay? And let's see. I'm just going to hit it really, really fast and get to the fourth part that I think is probably pretty interesting. Okay. Now there were some Greeks among those who went up to worship at the festival. They came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida, which I think is important, in Galilee with a request. Sir, they said, we would like to see Jesus. Philip went to Andrew, and Philip in turn told Jesus. Okay, and then Jesus talked with these Greek individuals. So the background here, this is once again using Philip to minister. Because, and again, I'm going to go through this fast. We could get really deep into this, but I don't think it's the most profound point to be taken. But Philip probably knew Greek. These individuals were Greek. They'd come to the Passover, so they knew who Jesus was, right? That's why they were there. They were at the festival, so I presume they came to worship and to learn, right? Jesus, taking on the human condition, spoke probably mostly Aramaic, and he may have spoke a little bit of Greek, but he probably did not know enough Greek to talk to these people. So it's possible that Philip, we know that he at least sort of helped introduce these Greeks to Jesus. They probably came to him because he had a Greek name, right? I mean, that's probably, when they look at the circle of people who knew Jesus, they may have come to him because he had a Greek name, just for familiarity's sake. And he helped facilitate introducing them to Jesus, okay? Jesus, I mean, of course we know that Jesus probably could have spoke to them miraculously if he needed to, but we also know that Jesus took on the human condition all the way to his own crucifixion. He died the same way that you or I would die in that situation as a human, right? And the same thing was probably the case with his life. He may not have spoken enough Greek. So that's a really good facilitation where he was able to minister. So again, we could really talk about that. I mean, I think Jesus probably could have talked with him if he'd have wanted to, of course, but he lets things play out in a human way, right? But the fourth appearance is the big one, okay? This is in John 14. Okay, so we're going to do, I think it's 8 through 11. Oh, yeah. Philip said, Lord, show us the Father, and that will be enough for us. Jesus answered, don't you know me, Philip? Even after I have been among you such a long time. Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Don't you believe that I am the Father, and that the Father is in me? The words I say to you, I do not speak on my own authority. Rather, it's the Father living in me who is doing his work. Okay, and then 11. Believe me when I say that I'm the Father and the Father's in me. Or at least believe on the evidence of the works themselves, right? So Jesus almost, so again, Philip says, show us the Father and we'll be satisfied. And Jesus is almost frustrated in tone that Philip doesn't exactly get it. And at times I wonder the same thing. So many times, and I can't be alone in this. So nod your head if you agree. There are so many times where I read in the New Testament where people just don't seem to get it. Even his own apostles don't seem to get it, and it confuses me after what was probably 3 years or so with Jesus, how it hadn't clicked a lot. But we have to think back about where some of these people came from. And I'm going to say the same thing about Philip here. Going back to his Jewish beliefs and his Jewish understanding of things. Did the Jews believe they could see the Father? It's kind of a tricky question, but think about it. What did the Jews know about seeing the Father? Their belief was, going back to the Old Testament, going back to Moses, that you didn't see the Father. You couldn't. All you could see was his glory, right? Moses longed to see the Father, right? But instead, he couldn't. He saw his glory. So for them, the idea, when he says, show us the Father, I think it could be, even though there's a little bit of frustration on Jesus' part because he didn't really fully understand what was happening, he still had reached a point of spiritual maturity where he wanted to see the Father, and he was beginning to maybe believe that he could see the Father. And so the idea to them, even still, they had seen Jesus and they had seen what he could do, but I don't know that it totally clicked, and I can understand why, given his Jewish religious background. I don't think it totally clicked that Jesus was the Father on earth and that he was actually looking at the Father, because that concept was just very foreign to him, in the same way that we, because Jesus does not share this, the earth with us now in human form, we long to see the Father, but we can't. And so I think that's a pretty profound question that facilitated a really direct response by Jesus. Okay? So does anybody have any thoughts on that? I mean, can anybody kind of bring in that, why he wanted to see the Father and why he would have thought he couldn't? Does that resonate with anyone like it did me?
He just didn't get it like we don't get it sometimes. Not just the Jews. Sometimes we in the church, we don't get it either.
It's right in front of our face,
It's right in front of our face.
but we just don't get it. Yeah.
And I believe that one of the biggest problems in this regard for us as Christians, sometimes we try to categorize or put the three in a box the way we want it to be.
Yeah. Like the Holy Spirit probably maybe more so than
Exactly.
the other two in the Godhead. Yeah.
Sometimes we don't get it
Yeah.
because the three are one. Now, for us to try to put God in a box, Jesus in a box, the Holy Spirit in a box, that's not the way it is. They are one.
Yeah, they're one. That's right.
Now, all of the specifics and the godliness of the oneness, we won't understand that until all by and by. But the one thing that we do need to get is quit trying to departmentalize the three.
Yeah. Yep.
In our own human frailty and mindset, because we would never figure that out until we get to glory. But they are one. That's the main thing that we need to get in our heads, is that the three are one. And we ain't got that yet.
Yep. That's right. That is a really strong point to kind of bring it all together on. In as we further examined, like in my studies, I think I saw Philip being a little bit more one-dimensional than he actually is. And through the great feedback we've gotten today, I think it's probably fair to say that much like us, there were some ways where he was quite mature. He showed great faith at times. There seemed to be a decent amount of intellect and a little bit of knowledge in him. He understood the scriptures. He understood who Jesus was, yet didn't quite see the big picture. Wasn't always as faithful as he could have been, much like us. And so, the last thing I want to say to kind of round this up, thank y'all for, I understand Philip better now after the feedback we got in here today. So thank you so much for the feedback. But always remember, the lesson for us is, Jesus always tells us to come, and he always tells us to go, right? And he told Philip to do that, and he did. And so that's why, if I could all sum it up, I'd say that is why I like Philip. So thank y'all for your time. I appreciate it very, very much.